All right, I think we can probably get started, Trina.
Hey, Um, good evening, everyone. Um, and so I'm just calling to order the Parent Advisory Committee distribution of donations for staffing meeting for today, March 5th, 2025. Um, and I think the first order is to adopt the meeting minutes from last week. Um, is there anyone in favor of adopting those minutes?
I'm in favor of adopting Suzanne.
Thank you. And is there a second?
I'll second that.
Great. Um, all in favor? We're gonna move to vote on that. Uh, all in favor? Great. I need to figure out how I can see everybody at the same time. And then is there anyone opposed? I think that was everyone. There, okay. Um, it looks like the meeting has passed. I mean, those minutes, sorry. The approval of the minutes has passed. Excuse me, I need water. Um, so let's move on to the next agenda item. And it looks like it's going to be a admin agenda approach or something. Staff presentation.
Yeah, I'm trying to get it to go to the next slide. Come on. Oh, there we go. All right, great. Um, so thank you, Chair, for getting us started. This slide here, we talked a little bit about public comment, and I'm proposing that we accept written public comment at our next two meetings. So that will be added to the public notice, how that people can submit written public comment via email to me. So that will be added. And then what we do is we combine all of the public comment into one PDF and share it on our committee's webpage where we have all the materials listed. So they will be shared at least 24 hours before our meeting. If you can get a chance to review them, because we won't like read through them in the meeting. It would take too long. It's just sort of like for you to read. And then if there are things that you wanted to bring up from the public comment, we could, it could be discussed in our discussion. So that is the plan. Does anybody have any comments, questions, or concerns about that? Yes, Ms. Ganich. Did you have your hand raised?
No, sorry, my hand was still raised from that previous.
I get the names confused. We have like 4 or 5 people with their first name starts with A, so sorry. I know all your faces. Okay. The next slide is, there is a link at the bottom of this slide, or you can go to the PAC webpage. That has a full report, but basically somebody brought up at the previous meeting, I think it was the first meeting actually, what do other school foundations do? And so someone on my team compiled a report of other regional school foundations in our region, Pacific Northwest, and they what they focus on, how much they raise, and in general, I'd say a lot of them report their funding in multi-years. So they're not showing like millions of dollars each year being fundraised. And many of them do like smaller grants to classrooms or have teachers apply. Or they fund different district program. Lake Oswego and one group in Seattle does fundraise for FTE. And in Lake Oswego, in that description, they mention $1.5 million. They don't say whether that was for a year or multi-years, but then they name like several different things that they fund in their school district. You know, they have 6,000 some students and a different demographic profile as a suburban area that we are familiar with, but that's what they do. And then the group in Seattle, the Alliance for Education, does fundraising for FTE, but they kind of decide what it's going to go towards, and then they fundraise from what we can gather from their information. And this is just background information. I'm not saying we should be following this model, but this is informative for us. Is there any discussion or about that, or Suzanne?
Yeah, I just want to add that PTAs in Seattle can pay for staff. The Seattle PTA doesn't recommend it, but there's nothing prohibiting it, PTAs from paying for staff.
This group, the Alliance for Education, mentions that they are doing some type of PTA equity model, and they did reach out to us a couple of years ago, and over the years, I think there was kind of a movement for having more shared resources because they have a similar situation, maybe in some regards in Seattle, where there's a lot of varying demographics depending on neighborhood schools. So that's interesting. They may be doing it through this group now, where the PTA contributes to this and they do it. I'm not sure. Nationally, PTAs are not supposed to fund staffing because it's supposed to be supporting schools, not public school budgets. But what their general rules are and what actually happens could be two different things. So
I do have a quick question with just as far as like part of our objective goes. Previously, the parent fund was set up so that people donated to a foundation, and then the 1/3 that was left over after the first $10,000 was allocated by people or schools submitting grants. And I was just wondering, like, what's our, if that's the way it was set up when people donated the money or gave the money, how is that, how are we reconciling us as a committee figuring out where that money goes versus the initial understanding that would be a granted by grants, gifted by grants?
Yes, so the way the PPS Parent Fund awards was a formula, and the fund for PPS board established that formula. We kind of, when it took over from the the management of the funding coming in from school foundations from all hands raised. And so it wasn't that schools applied for it as much as they qualified based on their demographics. So it was a formula that looked at the percentage of free reduced meals in the school and the combined underserved. So it was, I think last year it was 25% free meals. The percentages changed a little bit over the years, and then 40% combined underserved. So if schools had met both of those criteria, then they were eligible for awards. And then the amount of the awards were kind of dependent on the type of school, but this last year, they were relatively small. I think at the first meeting, I kind of shared the link to that. It's on fundforpps.org, and then you can go, or you can search PPS Parent Fund, and it was $700,000 overall. And so the grants were more in the range of $10,000 to $12,000. Some previous years, it was more like 25,000. It kind of varied depending on the fundraising. So we're going to get to a slide that is, we're going to discuss the criteria for the fundraising. So we'll come back to that question.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you can take a look at that full report that is linked on our webpage. And if you don't know where to find it, if you go to pps.net and then you search PAC, distribution of donations for staffing, it will take you to that page. I think it's also linked in our calendar invites. You know, the URL is linked to there. But it's basically all of our attachments for the meetings are posted there, and then our meeting recordings and minutes. Okay, let me move on from this slide. We do have a speaker coming at 6 p.m. So I'm just going to try to get through what we can until then, and then we may come back to our discussion. So there have been a couple questions about like our timeline for decision making and our process, and how are we going to meet this short timeline, and what is going to be our criteria for decision making. And I certainly understand the desire for like more structure. That is part of your role. You are policymakers on this committee. So I can provide more recommendations as we go forward, or help through that process. But I also want to allow space for the committee to also determine the process. So I will be getting to some more of those slides for feedback and discussion. But here I kind of like laid out like what we've done in the previous two meetings, what the focus. So this is just a summary kind of the agendas of what we have done. And then you'll see the next two meetings, March 12th and March 19th. So next week, based on the discussion of the committee of what we have heard so far and what you know and have seen in your schools and what you're interested in, you can ask for more information, presentations for other speakers to come back and talk about a particular opportunity or issue, or I can get more information. Say, for example, you were to say, I understand we can't have an educational assistant in every school, but with $1 million, how many could we have in schools? Like that could be like a question. And then I would go to the budget director and ask for them to do that analysis for us. So that's just an example. Also, the things that we have that have been presented can come back, and what we're going to hear tonight about advancing literacy. There are different positions and components and programs within that, so we could explore some of those deeper. So that is kind of the process. What I'm thinking is then we would narrow down to 2 or 3 scenarios, programs, and then we would explore those deeper on March 19th and vote on a recommendation. So that's kind of the idea of how the process would go. I'm open to feedback, and there is also, you know, an opportunity for our administrators, school administrators, to weigh in on the recommendations. I'm also trying to get some touch points with them as we go, and other district leaders, so that we're all, and we also, that presentation from Dr. Liz Gilkey of the community budget survey included a lot of input from principals as well. So that's another piece of the puzzle here. Yeah, Session, did you have a question?
Is that meeting, the late March meeting where we get feedback, is that on a Tuesday? 'Cause it says 25th, which I think is a Tuesday.
Oh, so that one is not a meeting. Yeah, sorry about
Okay.
that. That is spring break. And so our last meeting is proposed, if we're able to wrap up on March 19th, then it would give me time to get that feedback from school administrators, and then share that back out to the committee via email, and then going to the board on April 8th, which is a Tuesday when the board meets. So I wouldn't want to call anyone in for a meeting during spring break of this committee. That's the goal. Yeah, that was a little confusing. I'm just going to keep going to see if we can get through some of these other slides before our presenter, and then we'll have time for discussion after the presentation as well. So what I tried to do on this slide is kind of summarize some ideas for the criteria for decision making. On the right is from the intro paragraph of the policy, which kind of provides sort of like our guiding values, you might say. So this policy is designed to foster a spirit of community and shared purpose and facilitate collective impact on behalf of PPS students. Given our common mission and vision, the district encourages parents and community groups to advocate, fundraise, and support improving the educational experience district-wide in alignment with our racial equity and social justice values. So what I tried to do on the left then was like summarize the things that I think are being called out in the policy as criteria for us to consider. And so collective impact district-wide, that are the thing that we propose will do all of these things. Is this making sense, like this idea? So in the policy, they use the word formula, and I just want to, I don't want us to get hung up on that word, because a formula is a very specific thing, like what I was describing with the PPS parent fund, where it's like, if these 2 criteria are met, then this is awarded, you know. I think it's fair to say that it can also be a method of distributing these funds, because we have $1 million. There may not be a, you know, a formula that we can say like every school will receive this certain percentage. So I just want to make that maybe be a little more open And, you know, keeping in mind that this is a brand new policy and that it was, you know, written within a context, and we need to interpret it and apply it to the best of our ability with our current circumstances. So I think we're also hoping to improve the educational experience of students. That could be academic. It doesn't have to be. It could also be, you know, school climate, you know, mental health. It could be other things, but in general, I think that's what we all want for our schools. We also want to apply the racial equity and social justice lens, which means that you consider um, uh, the racial demographics and the income level, and that there is equal or greater weight given to ensure that the benefits are not going to solely the schools that raise the money or that have the most ability to do so or to advocate. So, I mean, that's how I would interpret it in this context. The racial equity and social justice lens is quite complex. It can be applied across all decision making. And I'm open to other, you know, interpretations and feedback on that, but that is a criteria that is also called out in all of PPS's vision, strategic plan, and this policy. I think that it's important and for grants in general, for investing money, to have it be measurable, that there is a way that we can be able to say what this money did. I think that was a challenge with the PPS parent funds because they were flexible dollars for discretionary funds, and there wasn't a way to measure the impact or tell a story of what those monies are doing in the schools. And that is really, like, for me as a professional fundraiser for 25 plus years, that is critical for motivating people to give their money, is that they know where it's going, they can see how it was used, and they can feel good about that donation. And then the last point that I included, and I'm open to others that you may have to add, is just that it also inspire future donations. We don't want this to be a one-time $1 million to invest just for next year. We want this to be an ongoing program and way of collective impact for our district. And it's new, and it's you know, kind of at risk of whether it's going to succeed and at what scale in the near term, you know, the following year and so forth. So I have done a lot of talking. I just wanted to kind of like get all that out and then open it up for discussion. Yes, Ayla.
Isla,
Sorry.
no problem. I was just wondering if you could give me a little more information about what you mean that it's at risk.
Well, we don't have a lot of donations coming in for this program right now. Under the fund for PPS, we've branded it Champion PPS Schools. So people can go to fundforpps.org and they can make a donation to that fund right now. It maybe has a few $1,000s. So nowhere near $1 million, right? And I think that the model that we had last year, you know, just, you know, up until June 30, was that school foundations and parents were volunteering their time and fundraising for this. That's why we have the $1 million to invest, right? And so I think, and so I'm talking about sustainability of whether, we're going to have this money on an ongoing basis to invest in staffing. It needs to be something that the community wants to invest in, that they're willing to either donate or do fundraisers or ask their business or their employer or, be a part of raising the money.
And I don't want to, I know Suzanne has a question too, but just as a follow-up to that is, I was a little confused in the first meeting where you talked about how there's a nonprofit that doesn't have any staff. I thought that they had professional fundraisers on staff, and so that it was, an opportunity to maybe take the burden away from the parents a little bit, but that's not, there are no.
That is the long-term vision, certainly. Right now it's me and one other person, and we're responsible for fundraising for the school district and the nonprofit. And so there we have another team member who's on leave for parental leave, having a child. And so that there are plans to hire an executive director for the fund for PPS and have it begin to still be closely partnered with the district, but have its own staff. But we're also fundraising for that. We're fundraising so that the sustainability of the organization itself, because the monies that came from school foundations were a complete pass-through. None of the money went towards operations or, funding the staff of the fundraising itself, if that makes sense.
That's,
yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Suzanne?
Yeah, two things. I would add as criteria for our committee's decision-making, community building.
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, so the auctions are still happening at a lot of schools, which typically went to foundation dollars, and they are now just going to many PTAs. So, and that's really understandable because the folks raising those dollars have no idea what's happening here and there is no goal set yet. So I'm curious, Robin, will you be going over like what limitations there are on our use of this 1 million, given that this 1 million was supposed to be dedicated to schools, that under the old formula weren't raising money for the most part, were getting those parent fund grants, and they were non-discretionary funds, so principals could use those funds any way that they wanted to. I'm wondering, can we use the funds any way that we want to? And just hypothetically to throw out there, because we're trying to re-envision this whole process. I mean, can we use the funds as money to throw a big fundraiser? Can we use it to fund a lobbyist to go to Salem and get us money from our legislators? Can it be used for a professional fundraiser to pay their salary? Could it be used for marketing and communications about what we've decided to do with the $1 million? Or could we even hold the money up and keep it aside for the first layer of dollars, towards a set goal where we say we learn from the district we need X amount of dollars to put an EA in every elementary school or a full-time librarian or whatever it is that administrators want. And then we have a concrete goal to aim for, and we dispense with those monies once that goal is reached.
I would say that last one is a possibility. I would say I would not recommend the the other ideas of increasing staff and lobbyists and a fundraiser. We do have some resources in PPS that can help us with the communications and marketing. I do have some resources where I could do like a contractor that could help, with a fundraiser. We have a government relations person and we have a contracted lobbyist through the school district that right now. So I think that those things could happen within our current like year's district budget, and that these monies should be something that is invested more in students, schools. But the last thing that you put out there as a proposal, I think it, could be if we feel that $1 million won't have the impact that we're looking for, and we want to, put out a goal and a future date of when those would be. Like, that's an interesting idea. I think we could discuss that more. Yeah. Audrey?
I have 3 monitors. My mouse had traveled off screen. I think that those are really good points that you brought up, Suzanne. Thanks for bringing them up, because I think that, like, I guess the question I would have following or piggybacking on that is, could we look at something that is training volunteers with that money? So like a training program or training, I don't know, looking at the amount of EAs that we're losing across a number of schools, like, is there some way to help supplement that loss that is looking at it with a different lens? And I think that's a really good point that you brought up. And then I think the other interesting point that you brought up, and that's something I continually struggle with PPS, is the vision is, what does community mean? Because community means one thing at like my school, but and then what our school travels to middle school, and then how it travels to high school. But like, when PPS is, and I think I've misquoted this at 86 and it's 82, I'm not sure the exact number, but in the 80s, how do we create community in that broad spectrum across our diverse city, that is inspiring enough to make people want to donate as a larger, like, before that, when there were the foundations, and as Suzanne pointed out, like, there were people that were parents that were donating to like the school that your kid goes to, and I don't know about all schools, but within our school, our principal was really transparent leading up to, before, and with every dollar that was spent. So we all knew exactly like how that was going. And so when you look at a broader community, how do you make that community feel like community? And 2, how do you have transparency through like such a broad swath of people? I don't have answers. Those are just questions.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, for sure. So Isla has her hand raised, and then we're going to go to our presenter, and we will return to our slides after that.
Thank you. I just wanted to, I think again, Suzanne had a great point, and I want to just sort of like dig into it a little bit, because I think the reason we're sort of feeling this tension of like, what are our goals here? How can we achieve our goals? Is because we intuitively sense that $1 million is not enough to have a district-wide impact, is not enough to have to touch everyone. And so we're thinking about these, as she said, I mean, we can think of projects that would have a collective impact, because they would be for someone like, as you said, a lobbyist or something like that, who would go out and try to get a better deal for everyone. So I see why that is a tension we have, because it's hard. Anything we pick with $1 million that is directly to be given to a student can't be given to everyone, probably. So we're having to make these sort of choices, but I do see the appeal of ones where we so you say I wouldn't recommend it, but what are the edges of that? I mean, is that just your preference and we can do it, or?
Yeah, I think I would like to get some feedback from the board before we go down that road with a formal recommendation, and I can do that before the next meeting. Yeah. But let's pivot. I'm going to take down this slide deck. There, Emily, would you like me to share your slide deck, or do you prefer to do it yourself?
That would be great if you could do it. I'm on a
Okay.
single screen and it's always a little trickier.
Yep. Let me pull this up. I hope I didn't leave you waiting too long.
No, I'm glad I got to hear part of the conversation. It's fascinating.
Thank you. Okay.
Great. Should I dive in?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Emily Glasgow. I am our Senior Director for Pre-K-5 Academics in the Office of Teaching and Learning. And I'm here on behalf of the PK-12 Office of Teaching and Learning. But I'm sort of just representing the team. My job is to oversee pre-K through fifth grade core academics, English language arts, math, social studies, science, also K-12 tag, our summer programs, and also high impact tutoring for the district. I also always like to say at the beginning of anything, I'm a PPS parent. I have 2 kids in PPS high schools that have been in the system since kindergarten. I also am a PPS graduate. I grew up in the system and was a PPS principal for many years and have now worked in our central office for several years. I think I've crossed paths with some of you before. And so nice to see you if we've known each other before. And I say all that to say, like, I'm here to talk about literacy this evening, but I'm very invested in this larger conversation about how do we, as a district, represent ourselves, build community, inspire, and continue to fund important priorities in the system for our kids, even as enrollment is shrinking and resources are shrinking and all those things. So thank you for being here. Thank you for giving your time to help figure this out. Tonight, I was asked to come talk specifically about literacy. You may or may not have heard, and I've linked some things in here that you can look at later, that literacy is one of our superintendent's top priorities. She's named 3 top priorities in her initial 6 months of the job, and literacy is the top academic priority she's named. This slide emphasizes a lot of why. We talk a lot in PPS about reading and literacy is a civil right. And without the ability to read, you really can't access any other learning or, many other experiences, and not just read, but speak and write and listen and all the pieces of literacy. And this is our 23-24 district-wide data on the state test, showing that, just over half of our kids, this would be 3rd through 8th grade data, we're meeting state and federal sort of reading proficiency rates, which is, unacceptable. And so that's the overall data. That's kind of the why behind the focus on literacy. And then if we go one more slide, we can see that information disaggregated by race. I'm not going to walk you through all this. I'm going to let you look at it for a second. What I will say is that it's very clear, and we're extremely aware of the fact that we continue to have a great amount of disproportionality by race in terms of our student outcomes and experiences, and are not okay with that. That doesn't align with our equity principles and values as a system. It does make me wonder, like the conversation I came to onto the tail end of that you were just having about how do we do something that touches everybody. This kind of data does beg the question of, is that the right approach? I'm just going to say that out loud, right? Or should there be more of an equity model to how we think about using limited resources, given this kind of data? So I guess my task tonight is to give you like a high level overview of what are our academic priorities, in particular with literacy. What are the investments we've already made? What are the systems we've already built? And then where might there be some potential gaps and areas for growth? This is what we call our roadmap to educational equity. We've been using this for a couple of years centrally to sort of ground ourselves in our why and also our how. We developed an instructional framework, I think 3 years ago now, that really describes, like, in any grade level, in any content area, what should good teaching and learning look like? And that's kind of that North Star at the top. The other thing we've done is invest over the last 3 years in particular in really high quality research-based instructional materials or curriculum, specifically in language arts and math, K-12. And then the third wheel of this is that we have built out systems over the last several years to support professional learning. And that is professional learning, like actual workshops and time for teachers. It's also coaching. It's also working with our school leaders. And the theory of action here is that these things together, if we have the right curricular resources, we have a clear vision for what teaching and learning should look like, and we're supporting and training our educators to use those resources well, should move us to educational equity. We can keep going. So I want to just kind of, again, like go over, so what are some of these investments? What do they actually look like? Just so you know what's already in place, because I think that can help you think about where are the places where there's gaps and we could help supplement. We do now, largely thanks to the previous bond, we do now have high quality adopted resources in place in all pre-K through 12th grade classrooms in language arts. You can see in the earlier grades, there's several components, there's several pieces, because teaching reading to younger children is a more complex science with a lot of different pieces. And then as kids get older, it becomes more about, comprehension and writing. But we do now have these core resources, and that is no small thing. And again, that was thanks to bond funds. We can keep moving. In terms of professional learning, so that was one of the spokes of that wheel. We have also invested over the last several years and continue to invest, although, as resources shrink, it gets tighter, in our teachers, in our educators, and our leaders, and making sure they understand, like, the science of reading and the research behind literacy and how kids learn to read, so that they can really skillfully use these resources that we've bought. So in terms of professional learning, over the last several years, we've done teacher summer institutes. We have some professional development days built into our calendar year. We just had one on Monday. We have professional learning communities, like grade level teams or content level teams, that meet during the school day and work together on how to use their curriculum skillfully. And then this year, in our K-8 schools, we have early releases. Many of you know who are parents, approximately once a month. And in K-5, in our elementary schools, we've invested, I'll talk more about this, through a state grant, in really going deep with educators during that time on the science of reading, on them really understanding the research behind how kids learn to read so they can skillfully use the curriculum that we've purchased. And then we've also invested in school-based instructional coaches. So all of our K-8 schools are still, even for next year, allocated to have an instructional coach who works with teachers to support that professional learning and planning. And then we have a small squad of early literacy coaches who work alongside those other coaches. They're funded by the state grant, and they're specifically supporting those elementary schools that are in our science of reading cohort. We also, like, most of our energy, as everything I've talked about up until this point, is in sort of core instruction, that daily instruction in language arts and literacy that all kids get every day in school. And we know that we have to make that super strong so every kid has that foundation. And we know that there are, as we continue to strengthen that, there are still too many kids who have lagging skills and have gaps and need some, below grade level remediation at the same time that they also need that high grade level work. And so we also continue to invest in interventions. We have reading intervention teachers assigned to specific schools based on data. And those reading intervention teachers work in schools, but they are centrally supported with professional learning and materials. In our 1st through 5th grade schools and classrooms, every single day, there's what we call a win block, which is the what I need block when intervention happens and things can be differentiated for kids. And then we also have invested for the last several years in a research-based strategy called high impact tutoring. We've done it in different ways. We have different models. This year, the largest model that we have rolling, and this makes me think, Audrey, about what you were saying, what your last comment, is that we have hired over 50 limited term EAs. So these are people who were not already working in schools, and they're largely from the community. And we've trained them up to be able to do high impact tutoring in schools during the school day with kids who need what we call tier 2 intervention. And that's aligned with our curriculum. And then just to, again, I think it's important as you guys are thinking about money and investments to understand all the different inputs. So of course we have our general fund money. We did have our previous bond that highly supported curriculum. Another large investment in literacy is through the state. So there's kind of a perfect, hopefully perfect alignment of stars right now where we have a governor and a state very invested in literacy, a superintendent very invested in literacy, and some of the right core investments in place to really lift this work in PPS right now. Over the last couple of years, our state has come out, I think 3 years ago, with an early literacy framework, which is linked here if you're interested in learning more about it. And then just in the last couple of weeks, they also came out with an adolescent literacy framework. So I think these are really helpful documents if you're interested in this topic to better understand, like, what is all this stuff about literacy? What are all the components? What needs to be in place in a school and a district to have successful literacy outcomes? Those are all kind of outlined in those frameworks. And then the early literacy part is backed by money. So there is legislative action now around this and protected grants for districts to support early literacy work in districts in service of this framework. So we are just wrapping up the first biennium of that grant and starting to plan for the second biennium. We are getting as a district approximately $6.5 million per biennium for that grant. There's some really targeted ways that we have to spend that money, and we have largely been using it for teacher professional learning, small squad of literacy coaches, a small squad of extra literacy interventionists, some of our summer acceleration programming that we do, high impact tutoring, and pre-K curriculum. That list, again, has designated spending categories. It will continue to shift as our practice shifts. Like the second biennium will look a little bit different than the first biennium, but those tend to be our core funding priorities through that money right now. Okay, and I think this is my last slide, and then I'm going to stop all this talking and see what questions you have. I said earlier that the superintendent named literacy as one of her top 3 priorities in her entry plan this year. And a piece of that was asking a group of us across several offices to come together during her first 100 days and do a really deep dive analysis of what the current state of literacy is in PPS, pre-K-12. So if you're interested in like the more detailed outcomes of that, you can click on the link on this slide. But what I wanted to share here is just based on that current state analysis, there were 3 high-level kind of next steps that our working team named. The first was that we really need a long-term multi-year literacy plan, including this big launch that I hope you've been seeing on social media, sort of like starting to invest our community in conversations around how the whole community can lean into literacy. The second is empowering families. And so a gap we identified is that although we've really leaned in with resources for educators and professional learning for educators, we have not done due diligence yet with really educating families and how they can be partners in their students' leadership journeys. And then the last is around extended learning. So really thinking about, again, kind of pre-K-12, and we definitely saw a gap at the middle school level. What are we doing before and after school? What are we doing over the summer? What are the extended learning opportunities outside of the school day with our community partners and others that can wrap around the experience kids are having during the school day? And how do we have a lot of different stuff in that space right now, but how do we align it? so that it's strategic and really connected to what kids are doing during the school day. So those are next steps for us as we think about where we're going around literacy, and then obviously continuing to support our teachers in using our curricular resources really skillfully with kids every day. So I'm going to stop talking. That was a lot of information, and I have lots of things for you to click on later, but I'm, curious to hear what your questions are. And if I don't know the answer, I will take down questions and get back to Robin with answers. I lost your hand up.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. This is a really just sort of trying to figure out how this works question. So not not a complicated one, hopefully. At my kid's school, we find that there's not a lot of time for these extra interventions. When do you do so there's like what I need time, but then it doesn't seem like there's any other time that doesn't sort of like before or after school, like it prevents some groups who don't have transportation from being able to attend. When do you do these sort of like high impact tutoring versus reading intervention? Because I understand they're two separate things, but for us, it's only what I need time. And I think that's like 30 minutes a day.
Yeah. I mean, I'll start by saying like the research is very clear that like the money is in core instruction, grade level, standards aligned, core instruction every day for every student. And so that is where the bulk of our day is spent. And then what we work with our teachers on is if a student has, say, below grade level decoding skills, but they should be accessing fifth grade text, what can the teacher do to support them to still access that fifth grade text and have that fifth grade learning experience during the day? So that's thing number one. The what I need block at the elementary level is where intervention happens. It's 30 minutes in the primary grades and 40 minutes in the upper elementary grades. It is also where high impact tutoring happens. So high impact tutoring is considered tier 2 intervention. And then our formal hired interventionists do what's called tier 3 intervention, which would be kids that are multiple grade levels behind in their core skills. And then I guess the other piece is during the core instruction blocks, there should be some differentiated support happening. So there are spaces for there to be some small group instruction and differentiated support so that kids are getting some of that kind of close to the curriculum intervention during the core block as well. More time for everything I should have started by saying like more time for everything would be amazing. That's like given the time we have, how we piece out the day and how we help educators try to think about how to put the pieces together.
Thank you.
Other questions or responses? Suzanne, sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. This was really wonderful. I'm wondering if or I had the impression that you were going to tell us about some ways that dollars could go to helping the early literacy effort. In general.
I can. I absolutely can. I want to say I'm one voice in that. I'm one perspective in that. And I did have this conversation prior to coming with my 612 colleagues. So I'm not just speaking on behalf of the elementary perspective. When I think about the amount of money you have and the problem you're trying to solve of how do we take what's really not that large of amount of money for a school system our size and think about how to be strategic with it. I think high impact tutoring is an interesting thing to think about. Right now, we're able to fund that only for kindergarten through third grade classrooms because those are the parameters of the early literacy success grant. So thinking about high impact tutoring for fourth and fifth grade or middle school or even potentially high school, right, could be an interesting thing to think about. It's a relatively inexpensive investment and it's very research based and backed. I also wonder around this still somewhat amorphous goal around family engagement and family education around literacy and how we help build up family home capacity to support kids with literacy development. There's several different there's apps, there's digital tools, there's programs, there are things that exist that are built for that need and that we could talk more about if you're interested. But we know that is a gap we're working on as well. I'm sure there's others, but those are the first couple that come to mind that aren't, staff, which we know are very expensive and probably less sustainable. All right, Audrey, and then how do I say your name? Sachin or Sachin or
Section.
Sachin? Okay, Audrey and then Sachin.
I just had a follow-up with the high impact tutoring program. And have you been a part of creating that?
Yeah, so I inherited that in my portfolio of things last spring. So I have been learning alongside a team that had already been, well into the creation.
Awesome. My daughter is a recipient of that, and I
Oh, great.
thank you for putting that together. I think it's been huge. And I guess my question is, as we look at maybe a loss of educational assistance across the board, could this be something that might help fulfill that? Like, does somebody who's in the high impact tutoring program, can they work between multiple schools? So if we invest our dollars in that, could that be something that is a resource for multiple schools? Or like, how would those dollars fluctuate to make that system?
Mhm.
I mean, could it essentially substitute in a somewhat of a way, and then maybe have higher impact in different schools depending on needs, but following the equation?
Yeah, I think we're in the process of analyzing a few different models that we have at play right now to figure out which is most effective and also which is most sustainable. The one is that we've hired these limited term EAs and trained them, and then based on data, place them in certain schools. And they're working during the win blocks in those schools. Another is that we have sort of an emerging partnership with a nonprofit called Reading Results that basically does the same thing, but they do all the management of it, and they hire teams and train them largely from within the school community. So I also think this could tie to this idea of how do we engage the community and build up understanding and vision. And so what we would do is we would say, if we're funding, or if you're funding, 20 schools, like, we could support you with looking at data to determine which 20 and then which students within those 20. And we could help you think about what's a per school cost. I think it depends a little bit on, the the calculus would probably look different if we were looking at the middle grades or the high school, because the scheduling's different, but we could help you guys think through that and learn a little bit more about that if you were interested. Sachin?
So I have two questions, kind of. One, I know like librarians and libraries are a thing that, like, my elementary school, right after I left, had to fire their librarian. I don't know if they've had one really since. My grandma volunteers there. She says it's like they haven't really had a consistent library. Hey, off the computer. Sorry, my cat is right here. But I was curious, you know what kind of impact like libraries and librarians have on kids learning? Because I know for me at least, like, having a fully stocked library and a librarian definitely helped like make me read a lot more and probably improved my literacy. And I'm curious whether that has like a effect across a lot of people, or if it's pretty localized to people that are already, stop it, reading at like a higher level necessarily.
That's a great question, and we should at some point bring in like sort of our library team experts to answer that question. I would say we've decreased library staffing over the last couple of years. Every school still has some library staffing. I know that some principals are concerned because they're not able to keep their library open all day given their staffing. I would say like largely like libraries are really important. They give kids access to books, and often it's a place that sparks love and joy. And they also do some important teaching in our library spaces. It's not reading instruction, right? Like when we think about like teaching kids how to read, that happens in the core classroom, and then that's supported in libraries. There's also other, social media skills and research skills and data skills that happen in libraries. So I think it's important. It's definitely connected to literacy. It supports literacy. From this team's angle, I'm not sure, the investment there would be staff. And I think that at the point you're at in development, that would be a hard thing to do, right? But Robin could speak more to that. So I don't know if that answers your question, Sachin. And we have people whose job this is who could come and say more about research behind connections, if that would be helpful to you, or get Robin that information. Did you have a second question? No, okay. Daniel, do you have a question?
Yeah, so I guess it'd be for you and also for Robin, just sort of the basic concept is, if we do want to consider something like high impact tutoring as the proposal we're going to do, where we would get information about the amount that that costs, or how many schools we could do it for, or how many hours we could do it for, or sort of some kind of proposal that we'd be able to use. And maybe that's for later meetings, Robin. But I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, we could invite that team to come to our next meeting. It could be a combination of like proposals of how we could use the funding next year. Could also be like, if we had this much more, we could also add these grade levels, or, you know, kind of along the lines of what Suzanne was bringing up of like inspiring more giving and like expanding something. So yeah, Emily, does that sound right to
Yeah, I mean,
you?
that's my team. I think we can work on a model too. I think the other piece to realize, and this is part of the sustainability question, is everything takes staff to oversee. So it's not just a matter of adding schools, it's who's going to train and support, and like, do we have the administrative staff to do that, or do we need so I think I guess I'm thinking a few things. One, we're working on, given our available budget, what do we think our capacity is for next year? So we might land that and then say, man, there's these other 10 schools that based on the data, we really wish we could serve. And we might be able to come back with a more specific ask of these 10 schools whose data says they need it would cost exactly this much. And we know we have the capacity to do that. And we could also draw up some models of if we wanted to pilot something in middle school, or pilot, you know, 9th grade algebra, or like whatever the thing is, what would that look like and what would the cost be? And is that something our team would be able to support, or would we need to bring in colleagues on that? So I guess I say all that to say, maybe we can work on some models, work on some ideas, and bring that back if that's something that you guys would like to know more about.
That's awesome, because I was just thinking that, and like you said, Robin, in the beginning, we had these concerns about the process, and that is probably some of these decisions are going to happen towards the end of the process. But like, you know, I don't know anything about how much it costs to put tutoring into one school versus 20 schools versus, so what that even would look like. And so if it may help us, someone, especially like me, who's uninitiated to the school system, to make a decision as to how to use the funds. Because like, okay, we go with high impact tutoring. Is that helping one school? Is it helping 50 schools? Is it helping 10 kids? Is it helping 1,000 kids? I have no idea. So I think that'd just be helpful later in the process.
Yeah, we can work on that. David, nice to see you, by the way.
Hi.
I know we go way back.
I'm surprised you remember. Anyway.
Of course I do. Of course I do.
So when you show that one, the initial slide at 55%, 55.3% meeting goals. Now, I'm assuming that's from K through 12.
That's 3rd through 8th grade, because it's the OSAS state language arts assessment that we only administer 3rd through 8th grade.
Okay. So I'm just kind of wondering, you know, all of this is kind of geared towards early childhood literacy, but there's definitely a problem in high school as well. I'm just wondering how that's being addressed. Is that a separate program? Is that integrated with this program? How is that literacy in high school being addressed?
Mm-hmm. So some of the strategies are the same. So the high quality instructional materials that we've purchased, I mean, it's different curriculum, but same idea. We've purchased research-based curriculum. We're doing professional learning with teachers. There are some different models of intervention and acceleration and remediation happening at the high school level. I think there's still several different things sort of being tried, and we're working out what that looks like systemically. There are conversations about, I mean, high impact tutoring could work at any grade level, and there's research to support that. So that's like a thing we could talk about. We don't currently have that happening. We haven't done it as a system beyond 5th grade, but we could, right? Like, so I think if this group was more interested in a gap at secondary, we could talk about that too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Audrey, did you have another question?
Yeah, I was still just a little. So, do the high impact tutors, do they travel around from one school to the next, or do they stay at the one school? What is their like data? Can you just tell me what their day-to-day looks like?
The model we're currently using is they're at one school. We have 3 different models at play right now. So one is that teachers from the building are doing high impact tutoring before or after school. That's our smallest model right now, and that's actually our most expensive model. And then the other one is that we've hired these limited term educational assistants who are acting as tutors in the building, and they work, so it's something like 3 hours, and they work just in one building, and they're supporting the WIN blocks in that building.
So they're like a 0.2 FTE or something, or like a.
Yeah, they're hourly. Because they're what's classified as limited term educational
Okay.
assistants, they're hourly instead of sort of hard FTE in that way.
Okay.
But there's different, again, we're playing with different models to figure out what's going to work. And then we have a little squad of limited term teachers who are supporting them, who did the training and then are going out and supporting them and checking in on them and having weekly meetings and stuff to monitor their progress.
Could that be something that they move? But I come from like a rural area where like special education teachers or other teachers might move from school to school throughout the week or even throughout the day. I know that like there's travel time within that, but to get a full-time day in, but to be able to have one person without the overhead of the training so much per person, and to have one person spending a more focused time after that training working throughout schools. Is that like?
Yeah, I mean, any of these things are possible, sort of within the rules of our contracts and stuff. I think that's actually a more expensive model, because with limited term employees, we're not paying benefits and we're not losing time for travel. And really, for us, like training more people doesn't cost more. Supporting more people costs more, but training more people doesn't cost more. And so I think that this current model of limited term within one school community is a less expensive model. I also just know, and it sounds like maybe some of you are educators or work closely with educators, that anytime people have to work across multiple school communities, like the work is trickier. And I don't know, more logistics of coordinating schedules across multiple schools and things like that can be more complicated. But I mean, I think all these things are within bounds to talk about. Suzanne?
Is this type of early literacy typically funded by taxes in other districts around the country, or so most of your program is funded through a grant and some funding from the legislature? I guess my question is, what are the risks of, and we'll run into this as a committee, I think, with every option we consider, is what is the risk of us funding something, but then that funding disappears because our interests, or we feel like we need to switch to funding something else. So I guess I would just also want that to be part of the thinking. If there's information you're bringing back to us, like this is something that we need to fund now, but maybe not later.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, I think so for next year, we have funding for K through 3 high impact tutoring coming from the state grant and within our general fund. If we were to supplement it and either add more schools or more grades or whatever, that would need to come from another source, because it would be likely either contracted services or limited term services. There wouldn't be the challenge of we've hired staff and now this group doesn't want to fund this anymore and we have staff, right? I think that's why I think Robin, and I heard you earlier sort of discouraging the hiring of staff as maybe that would, I think, become stickier, Suzanne. Whereas I guess I would say, like, if we were able to do tutoring at a grade level we're not currently doing it, or schools that we're not currently doing it for a year, that would be really good for those kids. And if for some reason gears had to shift the next year, nobody would lose their job and it wouldn't like throw everything up into arms in a school community. Does that? And again, I'm not trying to sell high impact tutoring as what you guys should do. I think it's just an easy one to talk about because it's kind of concrete and it's measurable. I'm sure there are other such things like that could also, you could use an equity formula to think about how you roll it out, and you could measure it and you could put it in a school and if need be, take it out without making people lose jobs or throw the school into upheaval. I think that's would, to me, be the kind of thing you would want to think about. And the other thing is we could bring, my secondary colleagues could also come to a future meeting if, like David, if you have more questions about high school or what's going on there specifically, or what gaps could be there, they'd be happy to come as well. Isla.
I think I'll probably ask this of every presenter because we've sort of been tasked with two things, which is, how do we allocate funds now, but also how do we create a sustainable system? And so what we heard earlier, I don't think you're part of the meeting, was that most of the funds came in from the prior year based on the old model, and they're not coming in now. So what can we do in terms of what we decide to spend the money on that we can create motivation for everybody to give, or the folks who used to give? Like what do you think you have a program among your big basket that would be appealing in the minds of folks who, I guess, gave the $1 million that we have now, whoever those people?
Great question. I don't know. I don't have a good answer off the top of my head. I think that's a great question. I think the best thing we can do is invest in something that we can measure you can measure the output, right? So you can tell the story of like, we made this concrete investment of public funds and X number of kids or X number of schools made exactly this much progress in this very exciting way, and personalize that and hope that that appeals to the larger community. I think what's hard is that it's not always the folks who are giving the money whose kids might be served by a program we put in place based on an equity formula. And that's why we have people like Robin to think about how you tell that story in a way that's appealing to the larger community. I know also, I would say anything, I guess we didn't talk about this, another piece of my team's work is our Connect to Kindergarten work and our kindergarten enrollment work, and also our pre-K programs. I supervise and oversee those, and anything we could do to draw families into PPS ultimately is not only wonderful, but it's also fundraising for the community, right? Because when our enrollment drops, our overall resources drop. So another thing to think about would be our larger enrollment campaign, how we're bringing kindergarten families in, how we're bringing pre-K families in. I know our superintendent has talked about wanting to do a large scale enrollment campaign, and I wonder if there's investments that could be made in that area as well.
Well, this has been amazing, Emily. I promised to let you off the meeting at 6:45. So yeah, I think that we will continue on with our questions, and then I'll get back to you and the team about next week and the following if we have other presenters that could come forth.
Great. And thank you again for doing this work, you guys. It's exciting, and I'm excited to see where you land, and happy to help in any way I can.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
All right. So I was looking back at my slide deck and I only have one other slide. I think we should continue with our discussion here, and then I will just touch on that at the end. Suzanne?
Yeah, I want to thank Isla for the question, because prior to this week's meeting, I've been reaching out to folks, asking them for ideas of like what they think would be a good way to approach this dilemma we have. And one of the parents that I spoke to said, well, so the old model for foundations was, even if you were to donate through the Fund for PPS website, was you would click on a school on like a drop-down menu, and you could choose to donate to the school. You could also choose to just donate to the fund. But the idea also was, if you're going to your auction, you're going to your auction for your school. And the parents said, if we could put forward the idea of, instead of clicking a school, clicking a cause. And that I think all PPS parents could get behind early literacy or putting tutors in schools. And so what are other, and I'm seeing unfold like future PAC structure in that you, there would be presenters just coming with these great, exciting ideas for programs that needed a little bit additional funding here or there. And then the Parent Advisory Committee could consider all of those and put forward a method for funding some or all of them. But again, just wanted to put out there the idea of, clicking for a cause might be a way for us to go with this.
Session.
Okay, so this might be a little dumb, but would it be like fraud if when we had that donation thing, we just leave the like donate to a specific school box on it, but then instead of donating to a specific school, all of the funds just end up getting funneled into the for every school? Like, would that be illegal, or would I'm not really sure.
Yeah, we kind of we did a little of that in the transition. Like we had like if the donations came through by June 30, they were allocated to the school, and if they were matched by the employer, it was credited back to the school, after the fact. But then if there were still things coming in for a school, we'd try to contact the donor and say, oh, we're not doing that any longer. It's going into this. And then so that kind of transition has happened where it's now, there isn't the option, there isn't the drop down to donate to the schools, but I think what's missing is really this the story and the momentum behind like the reason to give and the why. I think that what Suzanne was just talking about of like having different things you could, in a drop down menu. I think that is certainly a place to go in the future as we build this. And it may be necessary if we're going to serve, pre-K to grade 12, because as we could tell from Emily's presentation, it looks different, depending on the grade levels and what, also the other enhancements that are, available to students in different grade levels. So there's really not a one size fits all, not one size fits all student, no, so I think there could be a really strong case to be made of wrapping our arms around all of our community, all of our students coming together as a community. We really cannot depend on the federal government in these times. Okay. There really could be like a movement. We need like spokespeople and, people who are known in the community and care about children and the future of Portland and what our children are able to, achieve so that they can be successful in their future, regardless of what they choose to do for work. But we want, there's a lot of talk at the state about, well, we have all these other needs around homelessness and drug addiction, and we're trying to make the case of like, yes, and if you invest in our children, you will begin to solve for the future, as opposed to like always focusing on like what's the most urgent thing that you see on the street. And so it really is like a groundswell of the community that I think it is beginning, is coming together, and that this is an opportunity, another way of bringing our community together, as opposed to, just simply dividing up the money by school and being done with it. So you know, it's a big challenge, but it's also exciting, right? So, David, did you have something to add?
I'd like to get kind of back to the process. I thought this presentation from Emily was great, provided very specific information. She provided a concrete suggestion on where, we might want to consider, placing these funds. The other two presentations from last meeting were kind of higher altitude conversations, no specific suggestions. And going back to what Suzanne said, this idea of a Dropbox that lists all the causes. There's a whole universe of causes out there that I'm not even aware of. And so, you know, it would seem to me like we would have to have 20 presentations, which we don't have time for. We would have to have 20 presentations to really, identify what priorities we should be looking at. And so I guess I'm at a loss to figure out, how are we going to make these decisions with such a short amount of time?
Let me share this other slide that I have. So we do have a community budget review committee of that reports to the Board of Education, and I just want to be cognizant that our job, our charge is not really like to look at the whole PPS budget and analyze it and make recommendations, and that is their job. And it's been a long-term existing committee for many, many years. They're so you can go to their website and you can see the recommendations that they made at the end of last year. I can also email out the links so that it's easier to find. I just want us to be realistic that parent fundraising, I know we had a lot of conversation around like class sizes and the community survey that Dr. Gilkey presented. That was like one of the biggest concerns of parents is class sizes. I really don't think that parent fundraising can demonstrably reduce class sizes. We have the local option levy. That is like our best like method of increasing our number of teachers and reducing class sizes. It's really already in place. It just passed last May, so we don't have that like in front of us right now. Student counselor ratios, positions that are cut by budget reductions, when we have a budget that's cutting 40 million, like I just don't think it's realistic to make decisions based on that, the broadest, view. That I would encourage us to think about not letting the what's that saying? Not letting perfection be the enemy of the good. That there are many worthy investments of $1 million in Portland Public Schools because our state has chronically underfunded education. And there are a lot of really smart people doing amazing things in our district, and I brought 3 of them to you, to consider what they had to share. We can invite them back, or we can be more specific. I did not ask them to present how can $1 million investment be used. I thought it was premature in the first 3 meetings to go straight to that. I want to know if there are other, I think that the point that David brought up in his question to Emily, around like, well, what about in high schools? I think it's a very good point, because our high schools is where our student enrollment is growing. So that is where we have a very large population of students. And but we also know that many of them need reading support and support with math. And so I think the idea of the tutoring at the higher grade level, like, so that we could be part of them beginning to implement that, since they've been focusing at the elementary level. And we could make the case for why people should donate to serve the whole grade, bands or something like that. So that's something that we can ask for them to get back more information. And I'm also open if there are other things and you can either, I did want to end on time, and we only have a minute left. I'm sorry if I spoke for too long. You can also email me by the end of this week. It's a short timeline. I can either get people to our meeting on the 12th or the 19th, depending on their schedules. But I can also bring forth, more data or analysis for the group. Isla, did you have another thing?
Sure, I can do it in 30 seconds. Just to say that I know that it may seem difficult, but that is what makes the point of this whole policy, was that it was just about headcount fundraising. We could have done these other things before. So if we give up on the idea of staffing and headcount fundraising, then we're giving up on what makes this entire committee and the fundraising that we're allowed to do unique. So I don't want to give up on that yet, because really we could be fundraising for all of these other things in all of the ways that we have always done.
Okay, well, I will work on getting these, some of these other things we talked about. I also wanted to know whether people wanted more specific information about how $1 million could be used in the community schools, or other, like, more school climate or mental health. Or if we want to stick with the literacy and academics. So if you can, email me. I know several of you have emailed me. Feel free to reach out to me, and I will try to put together, a plan for next agenda based on that. Daniel?
Just quickly, yes, I think hearing different specific proposals for different things like community schools would be useful, because I think in the end we're going to wind up picking something that is almost like a prepackaged concept, because none of us have the background. Well, some of us do, but not all of us have the background to like say, okay, this is the exact amount we're going to do for XYZ. If we have it in some kind of package where we know, okay, we could do it with this high impact tutoring idea, we could do the community school idea, we could do this idea, and then we could actually vote together as to what one we want to do.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a nice evening. Oh, that was Trina's
you.
job. She was supposed to go. Sorry. Do you want to call?
No worries. No worries, no worries. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.